Greetings and salutations. Yes, this is Brasco on the radio, and welcome to Cannabis Radio Live. So this is episode 6, and glad to have you on. Darren Babin, who's normally hosting the show with me, is not with me this week. We're working on some things for 420 this year, and some of the other commitments he had right now pulled him away from the show, but I'm here to go ahead and join in and talk to all of you today. So on the lineup we have for the program, there's a lot of news when it comes to cannabis in the market, the where inflation stands with things with cannabis, and then also some study about sleeping and how there's extremes when it comes to sleep study they made with cannabis in terms of the consumption of things. And then also in the spotlight tonight, I want to go ahead and talk about Ukraine. Now, I was actually trying to get someone on in the Ukraine embedded there to go ahead and talk with us about what's going on over there because there was a story that came out through High Times that talked about how the European cannabis industry is going to be affected by what's going on in Ukraine. But again, everything happening in Ukraine now is affecting everything. So we'll talk all about that on the show. And in the meantime, if you want to go ahead and jump on in, if you're just catching the show, feel free to go ahead and jump into the chat, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook Live. If you have any comments you want to go and make, questions you want to go and ask, anything like that. And remember, make sure you can also follow us wherever it's social media when it comes to Instagram, or TikTok. No, not TikTok. I'm sorry, that's my thing. So Facebook and Instagram, you can find us there. So let me get into the news itself and get started. Now, while Americans have seen prices climb across most of the regular expenses, the cost of cannabis doesn't appear to be increasing. This is what's going on. So, inflation, what inflation? And this is a CNN article. They're talking about that when you have everything else that's going up in cost, price of milk, price of beef, price of whatever, cannabis isn't going up. And that's what they talked about. So if you got to go get groceries, your gas is going up, your utilities are going up, everything's going up way too damn high. The rent's too damn high. Like that one guy that ran for mayor, I forget what city it was. So the cost of cannabis hasn't gone up. Actually, a bag of edibles or an eighth of an ounce of flour is even cheaper than it was last year. That's where we are with things. So this is what they found out, that the price of marijuana flower, edibles, vape products, average of the price per milligram or gram per THC has declined between 11 and 16% from year to year. And this is where the group at Hebset, which Cy Scott, who's president there, who I talked to on the Blunt Business Program, he tracks the sales in California, Colorado, Michigan, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. So one of their head analysts that had said actually talked about how this would indicate that inflation hasn't yet affected the prices consumers pay for recreational cannabis in the US. And that's amazing news. I don't know if you've gone to your dispensaries or if you've gone to any medical marijuana treatment centers and seen how much it costs these days, but if it's not gone up at all, and that's the one thing that you can still hold on to, that means you don't have to go and lose it. It's not discretionary spending. You can still go ahead and buy and you get what you want. And it's the one price that doesn't go up when everything else does. When you think about even with the price of agriculture for any kind of fruits and vegetables, and cannabis isn't going up. That's great. So into the news more, the cannabis market went up overall this year, but the only thing was is that it did drop quite a. It didn't help from the fact of how New York worked out. So I'm going to show this real quick while we're on here, and I want to just show real quick this particular graphic that's up here about the growth. That's in the last 5 years of how many people have been getting jobs in the cannabis industry has gone up. So the market's gone up crazy. And then getting back to it, they said that the industry added more than 100,000 jobs last year. And Americans spent nearly $25 billion on cannabis. It's a lot of money. This is from Leafly, by the way, they're putting out there. And that when you're talking about people looking for work, the great resignation, you're talking about the great realignment. And for jobs that people want to, not, when you're looking to find something that's in an industry where you're not necessarily working from home or working from remote, that with this, there are lots of jobs in cannabis if you're looking for work. Right now, there are over 400,000 Americans that work in cultivation and retail or have ancillary jobs with licensed distributors in fields like accounting, construction, and regulatory compliance. And they could quadruple soon as the federal legalization comes in play. So right now, you have 38 states with medical, 11 states that are adult use, and in all those states, you get a chance to find work. And maybe you go to a LinkedIn or you go to a Indeed or a Monster, and there's probably a lot of cannabis related jobs that are there. If you're looking, it's available to you. And that's the best part. That's one thing you got to think about is jobs. If you need to go and find work, you want to go somewhere, that's the idea. Now, the one thing I mentioned was that the cannabis industry was hurt in New York, and that just got started. So Andrew Cuomo, before he gets, sent out because of what he did sign the cannabis legalization in New York, and at the moment there were only so many jobs available. 40 dispensaries right now in the medical program that serve 20 million people. It's ridiculous. There's no way to go and do it. It's like, it's like trying to go to Walmart and it's Black Friday and it's like Black Friday times 100. It's not going to happen. So at the moment, only 2,300 New Yorkers had full-time cannabis jobs. Like New York should be loaded with jobs, especially when you're worrying about people in New York that are fleeing away to Florida, where I'm at in South Florida, and they're saying to themselves, "Well, we need to go and worry about, getting people to stay in New York." Like, okay, pandemic, we're trying to lift restrictions. We're trying to get businesses back open. I was looking at a TikTok video about how many different leases are up right now and how many different closed down and boarded up storefronts there are all along Manhattan. And imagine if all these different places had jobs that you can go to. But some of these are going to have to get replaced where the cannabis industry comes in. If they want to have dispensaries, they want to have facilities. We know that people are trying to find spots for that. So if that's going to be what takes over some of that leftover real estate, then go for it. And in the story, they made mention of how that there should be about 25 to 30,000 cannabis jobs in New York, and they should be taking in over $1.5 billion in cannabis sales. So New York needs to go and spark the program. That's what the governor said there. Kathy Hochul said that she's going to try to get the program sparked up by 2023. Yeah, they're worrying about social equity. They're worrying about second chances and opportunity zones and things like that. But they need to get everything started so that people can get the licenses. They can get themselves the stores open and people can go buy some weed. Okay, buy some cannabis. That's what they need to go and be able to do. Now, another story I brought up at the start was mentioning about sleep. So, it's interesting about what certain effects that certain things like psychedelics we talked about last week, and what it does to your metaphysical beliefs, and what it does through it, as little as 4 weeks to 6 months that you feel the effects of what's going on there. Well, there was another story that came out, and this is in Family Safety and Health magazine. They talked about now that sleep extremes are more likely among cannabis users. So this was a Thomas Jefferson University research study, and they did a study taking data from between 13 years, 2005, 2018, 22,000 adults aged 20 to 59. And they identified 3,100 respondents who reported using cannabis in the last 30 days and found that cannabis users were more than half likely than non cannabis users to sleep at least 9 or more hours, and 34% more likely to sleep 6 hours or less. So the idea is that if you're a cannabis user, you're more likely to get a better night's sleep. You're also going to get more sleep anyway, which is probably good for your health because of the fact you get that REM sleep, that real deep sleep that really helps to go ahead and let your body go and just cool off and let your brain just rest. So you're not kind of just moving along and you're you know everybody talks about when you want to lose weight, you want to go ahead and feel better if you're able to go and sleep. And that's the one thing they talked about. Cannabis users, they also said, were more than likely 31% to report difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or sleeping too much. Moderate users, defined as using fewer than 20 times over the past 30 days, they were more likely than non users, half of them, to sleep 9 or more hours. And so it's not like they're trying to say that you could just, go right, skip the Ambien or skip the melatonin to go ahead and try to go to sleep. We're not talking about that. We're saying is that there is a significant thing about how much you're going to get out of using cannabis when it comes to helping you sleep, and whether it is an indica or sativa. And it wasn't always say that that the sativas are more of the way to help you sleep better, and that's where some people will use indicas to go and help boost up. Sativas go down. If you tell me if I'm wrong, if you're in the chat, feel free to go ahead and mention that to me because I don't want to say that out of context here. And so the study is in the December 6th journal of the Regional Anesthesia and Pain Medicine Journal. So if you want to go take a look at that, it's there. And so let's go ahead and move along now. There was a study also about cannabis advocates pushing senators to ease the draft bill's tax burden. So the one thing is that if the Congress, United States Congress, decides to go ahead and pass legalization, that there is a thing where you don't pass it too fast. And what they're talking about is they're saying that because if you're trying to get legalized right away and the rollout comes up, that it's going to help illegal markets or illicit markets grow faster. That you're not going to go ahead and stop the curbing of illegal markets, which is what every state has to deal with. Where they're able to get it passed along. Because what happens when you get legalization going on, and then you have interstate commerce? Like it's the idea of okay, there's nothing that's going to be held up for anybody for decriminalizing it when it's decriminalized at the same time. So if people want to go ahead and take it, and there won't be a thing where every state's going to have cannabis. So what about the states that don't? Well, they're just going to find somebody that goes to California or goes to Colorado. They'll take it on the plane. They'll drive it through. Nobody will even know at all, and they'll just say, oh, "Okay, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and let people just go ahead and get across, and hey, we'll bring it to you." Or people can still sell it as they want to, because we already know that people do that right now. There are a lot of people that still sell, except they're not growing it themselves anymore. They're just finding a way to get from other dispensaries. They're finding a way to go and smuggle it out, get it across state lines, and then sell it at a higher price because the market tells what it needs to be. So roll call. Talk about this story, and I'll read some of this real quick. So it's going to be a key factor. They're talking about now where you have Majority Leader Charles Schumer of New York, Chuck Schumer, Finance Chair Ron Wyden of Oregon, Senator Cory Booker, former presidential candidate of New Jersey, former mayor of New York. That's what I meant to say. Schumer actually had a floor speech in February that said the effort to undo laws, that aims to undo laws that have disproportionately targeted Black and Hispanic Americans, and that a letter he wrote to colleagues with Wyden and Booker argues to end the complications of a federal ban that's already legal in many states, and that marijuana can be legally sold for adult use in 18 states and for medical use in over a dozen more. So they put out a discussion draft that loosely outlined a regulatory and tax system based on those for alcohol and tobacco. And the effort looks to the Prohibition era as the historical case. So alcohol, right? That there's all these regulations, he says, and frameworks and taxations in place already that the federal government will have to deal with and not mess up completely when they put their umbrella on top. So, right. So once they roll out and there's federal oversight, you got to worry about all these different things that can happen, all the shortcuts that can be done. And that's the idea. Now, in this draft, they talked about putting together creating a federal cannabis excise tax that aims to disincentivize use by minors and ensuring that small businesses can compete with larger operations. And revenue would flow into a trust fund for communities impacted by the war on drugs, small business, and other related spending. And Senator Wyden says that the taxes would also play a key role in preventing youth access and paying for more important social equity and policy priorities. So, yeah, taxes for doing good. Okay. But my question will always be, is it actually going to go to the programs they say it's going to serve? The draft says it's also going to enforce to stop sales from continuing outside of the new regulated system. And stakeholders say that there should be a consideration for the excise tax, and that cannabis producers and importers would pay taxes semi-monthly for what they sold to distributors or retailers, starting at 10% of the sales price and climbing over the next 5 years. And then 25% of a federal price charged per ounce of product sold in flower form or per milligram of THC. That's a lot of taxes. I'm looking at that. I'm saying, okay, we're going to get this tax plus this tax. I'm like, all right, that's wonderful. It's a lot of money. And this is where we've talked about California and the news breeze here on the program. And I talk about, how much money they're actually paying the state and federal taxes that are going on right now, and just trying to say to myself, okay, how are we going to make that happen? I mean, California is already proving an example. You can't just overtax the industry because you got to do that. And it doesn't matter how good intent the tax is going to be, the tax money is going to be used for. It's still going to be taking away from the bottom line of all these companies. And where do you think that money is going to go? Let's be obvious. We know what that money is going to go ahead and come from. The companies are not going to pay that tax. The consumers are going to pay it. The customers are going to pay it for every vape pen, every edible, and you know, every bit of flour they get to go and roll up a joint. That's what it comes down to. And tax credits would slash rates and the first 20 million sales, da da da. And so they also talked about how they would offer no credit for early sales and a lower tax rate and a $1,000 per site tax. Like this is just they're just taxing away. It doesn't even make a difference what they're doing. It's just that this draft says, sure, you know, we all know that you just want to be able to legalize it, but then we're going to tax you like crazy. We're going to go ahead and make you spend a lot to make something out of it, and we're going to take a good chunk about it. That's what it is. Now, this is what they looked at. The Congressional Budget Office said that the House bill, if it were passed in 2020, the way it was set up, it would generate almost $13.7 billion in additional revenue for the federal government over a decade. Now, imagine when we're looking at what California gets, they get well over $1 billion themselves. If we're going by the estimate that the senator of New York, or to me, the governor of New York says, where she's expecting a billion and a half, then all these other states, I mean, I think $14 billion roughly. That's kind of short, but still, that's a lot of damn money for the industry to come in, and that's a lot of money to be brought in. But they're also saying that this would be per year. Isn't that what they're saying? $13 million per year. I think it's going to be more than that. So why even charge so much? I mean, you're going to make so much off the industry anyway, and opening the doors for other states to come in. You know, take a little less off the top, will you? Can we do that? Seriously. Now, with that said, that's the story there. There's a whole lot more to it. And just keep in mind that, anything else you want to learn about, just, anything you want us to go and talk about more about here on the program, reach out to us. Go on YouTube. You know what? If you also want to go reach out to me by email, I'll give you my email address. Brasco, Brasco at cannabisradio.com. It's any stories we should talk about in the news that we should talk more. Now, I took more time on the news because I only have so much I can bring up when it comes to the story this week in the spotlight. And that is the war in Ukraine, which I'll tell you what, I mean, last year I put a New Year's resolution together to say, okay, I'm not going to watch the news. I can't do it. Now, you can't get away from watching the news. Everything about Ukraine's out there. And I'm not one to go ahead and, jump into what I think about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and what the countries in Europe or what the United States is doing to sanction or how they're responding to it. I'm not worrying about that. But High Times put up a story that was very interesting about how there were EU members, European Union members like Poland and Turkey, that are worried about Ukraine and the effects of the Russian attacks are really focusing on with those areas. And how would the outbreak of hostilities affect cannabis reform and the industry across the region? So Marguerite Arnold of High Times writes about this, and then the thought was in the cannabis space she's reporting is that in Europe, at least, the pending issues of reform, so important to the industry post-COVID, if not other issues inherently in a globally interconnected world, may come to a halt. What will be impacted and what will stay the same? Because remember, in Europe, there's a lot of countries that they're still under restrictions or still have some kind of state of emergency in place. So, state of emergency now mounted on with another state of emergency because of this. I mean, for some people, I'm sympathetic. I mean, I feel sadness and pity for all those that are out there that are dealing with so much, and the lack of kind of freedoms that you'd had before all of this. And that, obviously we all had to make sure everybody was all protected, the general public. And now we have this other issue where, it's kind of hard for us in America because it's so far the other side of the world. But, given our history of the Cold War and we'll always ever hear about it, and I feel that politicians and people want to go and play this big chess game, well, that's what they're going to do. I'm not getting involved in it. you know, we'll see what happens with it. So one of the issues they talked about is the cannabis supply chain, but that's going on with inflation and what's going on with the pandemic anyway. So what's already been kind of a struggle anyway with the supply chain, they're talking about now. Germany sources some of the cannabis it uses for the medical market domestically. And by the way, Canada does a lot of exporting out to other countries. So, like they said, to South America, to Australia, because they had so much supply, especially since they legalized in 2018, that they're not able to get all their product out there and they can't let it go to waste. So, cannabis kind of played the OPEC of cannabis. So, if you need to get out to different countries, that's what happens. So, cannabis is coming into the country from places so far directly unaffected by the outbreak. So you got Denmark, Portugal, Spain, Holland, Greece, Colombia, Uruguay, Australia, Lesotho, and Uganda. But that means if you're getting them exported in, that means the prices are going up. I mean, it's part of everything else. Then there's also the talk about higher energy costs. Germany and Holland are two countries in Europe most affected by rising gas prices, rising directly. In the UK, the same thing, that EU and good marketing practices certification is required of all medical cannabis prescribed and consumed, and it must be grown indoors, all of it. And there's also an energy and water hog. So, right, there's no energy. It's obvious Europe does not have the kind of climate to grow sun-grown cannabis, so they all have to go greenhouse. So that's causing more of the prices there as well, and the amount of energy is being used for it because of whatever energy is being taken from Russia or whatever what's being brought in from Russia, things like that, and the Ukraine as well. Price issues are one of the greatest problems in the medical market now, namely the insurer's willingness to approve cannabis-related medicine. Now, in the Ukraine itself, the country is one of the largest cultivators of industrial hemp. I didn't know if you knew this. And cannabis with a higher THC level was also routinely grown, creating a larger user base. But legalization caught on, and Ukraine was trying to be one of those first European countries to go ahead and legalize altogether. And according to local advocates, the Russian invasion is essentially going to devastate the local cannabis industry after years of lobbying, including by the Ukrainian Association of Medical Cannabis. Before last Thursday, as I record this, or doing this live, it was possible to get a prescription for medical cannabis, but obtaining it both and at legal supplies were very difficult. And it doesn't mean there's no impetus for reform, but local experts are not expecting change now for the next 5 years. And there's been repeated efforts to introduce cannabis reform into the political debate, which have all failed. So now, this Ukrainian Association of Cannabis tried to submit a proposal to their parliament for medical legalization to roll that out. And 65% of the nation in a national survey says they're in favor of it. And so cannabis was technically illegal in the country, but people were allowed to grow up to 10 bushes of cannabis for personal use. So now it's very possible the illegitimate market will get a big boost, and there'll be a wartime interruption of everything with an inevitable black market and unavailability of medicines. So people will, regular business is going to kind of cease, but then the underground black market is going to come into play. That's what happens with these kind of things. And one of the greatest impacts they talked about when it comes to the war is the political fallout everywhere else. In Germany, where politicians already have mentioned COVID will be pushing the entire recreational cannabis conversation back, war is another distraction. And there's also considerations on the Canatech side of the equation also filling it. And that, there's a lot of people that are programmers in the Ukraine on our on a sister radio network that I work with. We talk to programmers and webmasters in the UK in the Ukraine, and the disruptions to Wi-Fi, the disruptions to power, and just you know just the really the concern for safety for them and their loved ones, and be able to go ahead and not be able to go and work and service other countries that they do because of the price difference. When you're trying to find somebody that works in the Ukraine or Russia, that you can find that you could outsource for considerably less, and now this right here really just throws a wrench into everything. So now in the story they close out and they say that the cannabis industry in the Ukraine needs to take charge of their own destiny. The vertical has been recognized globally as good for economies, a strong employer, and of course, producing highly effective drugs. even if people are still not copacetic and supporting full reform. And so it's just like here. I mean, they're obviously going to have much more problems trying to get themselves up and going with any kind of legalization at all. What are you going to do? They're in a bad spot. And hello, yes, thank. I don't know what the actual name is right there on YouTube, but thanks for dropping in. And so, closing it out really quick, with Ukraine, uh, just feel bad about it. We're going to try to go ahead and effort somebody that is there. There was somebody I spoke with that works with a website called Ask Growers, and they have talked to me about coming in next week to talk about what's going on over there. There was a story from Forbes magazine that I'm going to reference next week about their website and what they're going through right now to keep things going and the issues they have around with everything that's going on over there. So they're in a tough spot, and it's unfortunate. So thoughts and prayers for those in the Ukraine and what you're dealing with right now. And I'm sure all of our fellow listeners or viewers right now are feeling the same way about what's going on over there. So let's go and wrap things up. A couple of things I want to make mention of that are on the network that you want to go and take a listen to and check out for yourselves. Hemp Present's been doing some great stuff. If you McPeak, he actually talked to Leo Russell. He's executive director of the Decriminalize the Nature Washington and Theo Society of Washington. So she's on back on to go and talk things when it comes to legalization, or when it comes to legalization of all the issues with decriminalization. Basically, when it first started in Washington, when everything started up over there, really one of the early guests that we had on the network on Hemp Present itself. And then also, really interesting story I had where I talked on grassroots marketing to Matty Namer, who's with Cannabeta Realty. And he does realty work in New York and New Jersey. He's worked on like $1 billion buildings. The real estate developer himself, unlike somebody else that was served in the White House that did the same thing. But his work is incredible. And so just thought it was really interesting about what was going on in New York when I talked about how New York is kind of lacking in the jobs market and the economy of cannabis as a whole in the country. We talked quite a bit about that. So I'd go ahead and tell you to go and take a listen to that for yourselves as well. And the other one I got to tell you about too is it was somebody that we talked with that Darren mentioned a few weeks ago going to Canadelic. And one of the people he met was Charles Patty. He's a brand ambassador for Myself Wellness based here in Florida in Bonita Springs. And it's a cutting edge ketamine clinic. And there's a great documentary he puts together called Lighter, a Ketamine Experience. It's an hour-long documentary showing 3 individuals that go through ketamine treatment and what it does for them and where it really helps out with them overall. And the different variants areas where they come from. So it's really cool to go and see all of that. Anyway, that's what I got for you this week. Hey, I got through 30 minutes, got to do it on video, something, and you got to see my pretty puss do the whole thing. And I'm sure my producer Ricky is really loving this, and he's just like, great job, man. Great job, Brasco. Anyways, I'll leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. Come back next week. Darren should be back to join us for that. And hopefully we'll have that guest. Tia Moskalenko is her name. And hopefully we'll have her on for next week's show. And until then, thanks for listening in. Thanks for watching. And we'll talk to you next time.